Hello friends, and welcome back to Valor. I'm Carla Garcia, and today I want to talk to you about the power that our mind or our thinking has. Did you know that on average a person has over 6,000 thoughts per day, and that out of those 6,000 thoughts, more than 80% of those thoughts are negative? Did you know that our thoughts can actually lie to us because thoughts are not facts? And more importantly, did you know that our thoughts influence the way that we feel and the way that we act? If you answer no to those questions, then you may not know this, but our thoughts are actually the most powerful tool that we have in building who we are. And yet, we go through life completely unaware of the way that we think. Now, this is important because not being aware or intentional about the way that we think actually affects us in a negative way. Simply by one, we begin to accept thoughts that can be harmful to ourselves. We believe that thoughts are facts when it's not that way. 3, it affects our mental health and our self-esteem in a very negative way. And 4, and most importantly, our thoughts can keep us or prevent us from reaching our full potential. Thoughts influence the way that we feel and the way that we act. And even though we may not be aware of how much of an impact it has, it really is at the core of everything that we do. So if we think negatively, we're more likely to see the world in a negative viewpoint or perspective. And if we think positively, then we're more likely to attract positive energy and find the good and opportunities in the world that we have. So let me give you an example of this. Let's say that you wake up in the morning and you go to work. And as you get to work, you see a group of your coworkers just hanging out, and as you pass by, they start laughing. Now in your mind, a thought pops up, and that thought is, they're laughing at me. Now, if you think they're laughing at me, then you may feel embarrassed, you may feel judged, or you may feel angry. And when that emotion is provoked, then you're more likely to stay away from them, to have a negative attitude towards them, or to not want to interact with your coworkers. Now, let's take that same situation. Let's say that you wake up and you go to work, and as you get to work, you see a group of your coworkers just talking. And when you pass by, they start to laugh. Now, instead of thinking negatively, the thought that comes to your head is, man, they may be talking about something really fun. I wonder what it is. So if you think that way, then more than likely that may create an emotion for you, such as feeling indifferent, which means that you're going to go about your day like nothing happened, or even feeling curious, which means that you may go over and ask, hey, what's so funny? So as you can see, just in that simple example, the situation didn't change. What changed was the way that we thought about it. And the way that we thought about the situation influenced the way that we felt, and that influenced the way that we acted. So it's very important to be intentional about the way that we're thinking, because as I said, on average, we have more than 6,000 thoughts, and over 80% of those are negative thoughts, which means that if we're not purposely or intentionally trying to train our mind to think positively and look for the positive things around us, then we're going to miss a lot of opportunities. And not only that, but the way that we think becomes our perspective in life. So if we tend to think negatively, our perspective of the world is going to be typically negatively. And if we think positive or train our brain to try to think positive, then we're going to have a better outcome or outlook in the perspective that we have about people in the world around us. Now you may be asking yourself, how does a person begin to be aware or intentional about the way that we think? Or how do we begin to train our brain to think more positive? And I'm glad that you're asking yourself that, because the first step in really becoming aware or intentional about the way that we think is to understand what are the different patterns of negative thinking that we can have, and being able to know which ones we are adopting so that we can actually challenge them. So today we're going to be talking about 10 different patterns of thinking that are negative. And yes, I know that that seems like a lot, but keep in mind that we have over 6,000 thoughts per day, and 80% of them are negative. So there's different types of negative patterns of thinking. We're going to name these negative patterns of thinking ants, just like the little insect. And the reason for that is because AND stands for automatic negative patterns of thinking. And the reason why they're automatic is because they pop into our head without us expecting them or wanting them. Most patterns or negative patterns of thinking just come without us asking them to come in. So let's go ahead and get started on talking on the different patterns of thinking. Number 1, thinking an all or nothing. People who tend to adopt this negative pattern of thinking think in very black or white situations, meaning that they either see a situation as a complete failure or a complete success. So even if things went well, if something didn't go according to plan, then they see it as a complete failure. Number 2, overgeneralizing. So if you're adopting this negative pattern of thinking, you tend to take one situation or one negative event and generalize it to the future. So for example, you may have done bad in a job interview, but you start telling yourself, I am never going to be able to do well in a job interview. I am never going to be able to get a job. So again, you take one instance and you generalize it to many other ones. So you'll notice that people who tend to overgeneralize will use a lot of always or never. But the reality of it is that always or never doesn't exist because there are exceptions to many different situations. Number 3, mental filter. Mental filters tend to look at a situation and really pay attention only to the negatives of the situation. So an example of that is like, let's say that you made a presentation and people came and gave you compliments, but there was one person who didn't come and gave you a compliment or maybe said something negative about your presentation. So instead of focusing on all of the positive things that you heard, you choose to dwell just on that one negative comment or negative interaction, and you allow that to take over your day. So you filter all the positive and just look at the negative. Number 4, discounting the positives. People who tend to think in this way usually never give themselves credit for the positive things, and that can be a situation, an action, or even personal traits. So for example, if you apply discounting the positives, somebody may tell you, hey, you're really good at this. And you may say something like, I'm not that good. Or somebody may say, you did awesome in the presentation. And similar to mental filtering where you focus on the negative, you discount the positive and you say, well, it wasn't that great. So again, when we are discounting the positives, we don't give ourselves enough credit for the things that we're doing or the qualities that we have. Number 5, jumping to conclusions. So when we jump to conclusions, this is the type of thinking where we assume that we know what's going to happen or what other people are thinking. And there are 2 types of examples in jumping to conclusions thinking. There is mind reading and there's fortune telling. Mind reading refers to the fact that you assume that you know what people are thinking. And that can sometimes prevent you from being able to interact with others because typically you have a negative perspective. So you may think, well, I'm not going to go over and get to know those people because they're not going to like me. But in reality, you're just assuming or guessing what they're thinking because you really don't know unless you go out there and check it out for yourself. In the same situation, fortune telling is having that same mindset but for the future. So you may tell yourself, why am I even going to try to work out? I am never going to lose weight. Or why am I going to read that book? It's not like I'm ever going to be successful. So again, you are telling yourself that in the future, there's no hope for yourself. And the reality of it is that none of us can mind read, nor can we tell what's going to happen in the future. But the way that we think can really affect us because if we think that there's nothing optimistic in the future, then we're more likely to not give ourselves the opportunity to go after that, and we can even self-sabotage. Number 6, magnification. Magnification refers to taking one situation and making it bigger than it really is. So have you ever heard the expression, you're drowning in a cup of water? Well, that's exactly what that means. It means that you take whatever situation you're going or problem that you're going through and you make it bigger than it really is. So for example, let's say that you went to work and you made a mistake, right? So you begin to think, I'm going to get fired, they're going to be really upset with me, when in reality, it can just be that it was a simple mistake. they'll talk to you about it, and then you'll move on like nothing happened. So again, magnification means that you make a problem bigger than it really is. Number 7, emotional reasoning. People who tend to adopt emotional reasoning as a negative pattern of thinking usually think with their emotions. So what that means is that if they feel something, then they believe that that must be reality. So for example, let's say that you are feeling angry. So if you are feeling angry, then in your mind, you truly believe that somebody has wronged you or somebody is treating you unfairly. And that must be reality because you're feeling angry. But the reality of it is that that may not be the case. Somebody may be telling you something out of love or out of your own well-being. But again, you believe that because you feel that way, then the reality is that you're being treated unfairly or that you are being, in a way, harmed or victimized. Number 8, should statements. Should statements refer to the fact that you constantly are critical about yourself and feel that you could have done better, but in a way that is negative. So for example, let's say that you do something that is very, very good, but instead of giving yourself credit for it, you tell yourself, I should have done better, or I must do better, or I have to do this. So a lot of times what happens is that you end up making yourself feel guilty, you don't give yourself enough credit, and you lower your self-esteem by shooting all over yourself. I myself tend to really struggle with this negative pattern of thinking. And I have learned to identify when I am shooting on myself, because being able to be aware of when we're doing these negative patterns of thinking can be really helpful. But it's really important to understand that by saying I should, we don't allow ourselves the opportunity to really embrace and give ourselves credit for the things that we have done. Yes, we can always grow and we can always learn more because that's part of being human. But we also are going to make mistakes. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't make them. It means that that is an opportunity for us to learn and grow from them. Number 9, labeling. Labeling means that you attach a negative label or comment towards yourself because of the choices or the actions that you took. Now, it's very important to understand that we are not our actions. We all make mistakes, and sometimes we're going to take actions that maybe are not the most positive. But it doesn't mean that that's who we are. If I make a mistake, that doesn't make me a stupid person. It makes me a person who has to learn because maybe I didn't know how to do it correctly the first time. However, when we adopt a negative pattern of thinking that is labeling, we oftentimes label ourselves dumb, incapable, unworthy, and this can really affect the way that we perceive ourselves. And number 10, the last negative pattern of thinking, is personalizing and blaming. Personalizing means that you take a situation and you blame yourself for the outcome. A great example of this is, let's say you have a child and your child gets a bad grade in a subject. So as a parent, you immediately blame yourself for that. You tell yourself that you're not a good parent and that you must have done something wrong because your student got a bad grade. But that is not the reality. There are many different reasons why a student can get a bad grade. It can be because of virtual learning. It's so hard to really understand sometimes. It can be because maybe the teaching style of the teacher is different than the learning style of your student. Or it can be that maybe they just really struggle with that subject. But again, when we personalize things and feel that it's our fault, we're not allowing ourselves to objectively look at the situation and try to find a solution for it. Now, lastly, is blaming. Now, I want to be very intentional with this negative pattern of thinking because blaming is the most dangerous negative pattern of thinking that we can have. And the reason for that is that when we apply blaming, we blame others for our circumstances, for our actions, and for the situation that we're in. And this is very dangerous because when we blame others, we are doing a couple of things. One, we are giving them the power over our situation or circumstances because we are pretty much saying it's your responsibility that I am in this situation, and when you change, I'm going to be better. But the reality of it is that we can't control what other people do. The only thing that we can control is ourselves and our actions. And when we blame others, we give up our power, and that makes us feel hopeless. Another thing why blaming is so dangerous and it's such a harmful negative pattern of thinking, is that when we blame others, we also take away our own accountability and our own ability to take responsibility for our actions, to reflect on them, and to grow from them and change them. So that's why blaming is one of the most harmful and dangerous negative patterns of thinking that we can actually apply. So if you are using blaming, I really encourage you to begin to challenge that, because as long as we use blaming as a negative way of thinking and we take on that mindset, we're never really going to progress. So now that we know all of the negative patterns of thinking, you may be asking yourself, okay, what do I do with that? Well, this is where the magic happens, right? Because anytime that we want to make a change, we have to start by 1, identifying the problem, 2, being able to understand how does the problem affect us in a negative way, 3, be able to explore solutions, and 4, act on those solutions or those steps to be able to change them. So by being aware of the negative patterns of thinking that there are, we can actually break down and start to identify which ones are the ones that apply to you. As I mentioned before, shooting is one that I really struggle with because I always tend to have a really high expectation for myself. And I constantly have to remind myself that applying shooting really harms the way that I think about myself. So again, by being able to 1, identify the different patterns that you're having, you're going to be able to realize that you want to be more intentional of when these thoughts are popping into your head. And 2, you're going to become more aware of how are these affecting you negatively. And most importantly, you can begin to look for solutions or steps that you can take in beginning to challenge those thoughts. So I'm going to give you 4 simple steps that you can take in beginning to challenge negative patterns of thinking. So as we mentioned before, we named negative patterns of thinking or automatic negative patterns of thinking ants. So what we want to do is change those ants into pets. And what PET stands for is positive energizing thoughts. So the first thing that we can do is ask ourselves, is this an ant or a pet? If this is an ant, we want to ask ourselves, how does it make us feel? Is it helping us? And if the answer is no, ask yourself, what would I be or how would I feel if I didn't have this thought? And if that response is a more positive response, then I encourage you to challenge and try to change that ant into a pet. And the way that you can do that is that, let's say, for example, you tell yourself, oh, I made a mistake. I am really dumb, right? We're labeling. So instead of doing that, being able to ask yourself, well, is this helping me? No. Is this making me feel good? No. What would I be without that thought? I'd probably be happier. So instead of saying, I am dumb, tell yourself, man, I didn't do very good in that part, but I can definitely learn and grow from this. So again, being able to challenge that from an ant to a pet. Number 2 is using positive affirmations. What positive affirmations are positive statements that we tell ourselves to help us build and begin to think positively, such as, I am worthy, I am important, I am capable. All of these affirmations are going to begin to create thoughts that are positive. Number 3 is reframing. And what reframing means is that we can step back from a situation and try to look at it from a different perspective. So look at some of the benefits of the situation that you're in and try to find the opportunity in that. And lastly, number 4 is checking the facts. Ask yourself, is this thought real? Because a lot of times what we'll find is that the way that we think doesn't really match reality. So when we begin to check the facts, we're able to understand that our thoughts, in fact, are not reality. So in conclusion, my friends, it's really important for us to become intentional and aware of the way that we think. Just like building a muscle, being able to develop positive thinking takes intention, patience, and time. So by being able to begin understanding what are your negative patterns of thinking and challenging them every single day, you're going to take a step closer into beginning to build the thoughts, the image of yourself, the mental health, and the opportunities that you want for yourself. So once again, I just want to thank you and remind you that you are capable, that I admire you, that I respect you, and that I believe that you can and you will succeed. But we really have to begin challenging the way that we think, because remember that we are what we think. So thank you once again, and remember that in whatever you do, carry on with valor. Thank you for watching my video. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. If you want more information about automatic negative thoughts, you can go to my website, valorstrengthofmind.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at valorstrengthofmind. Don't forget that I will be posting a video on Thursday at 6 o'clock. And moving forward, I will be posting a video every other Thursday at 6 o'clock. In 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about self-esteem, how does self-esteem develop, and how can we improve our self-esteem. Once again, thank you for your time, and remember that in whatever you do, carry on with valor.